hmTv matters.
Hello and welcome to hmTV. I'm Bernie Furshpan, host of Raised by Survivors here at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center. Today I have a very special guest, and we'll be talking about a moment in time. We'll be stepping back into a place in March of 1938, the Anschluss, that turned Austria into Nazi territory literally overnight, and Jewish families suddenly face a race against time. My guest, Larry Altschul, brings a personal lens to his history. His family saw what was coming, secured visas, and escaped before the doors slammed shut. Their story is not only about survival, it is about clarity, it's about courage, and taking action when the world shifts around you. Larry, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
It's quite a story that your family have had. You've told me the story before, and I thought it was important to document it.
Yeah, no, it really is. I've gotten this story from obviously from my mother, and if you'd like, I'll begin.
Well, I'd like to first start off with what was life like before the Anschluss, before 1938? What did they tell you about their life? How did they grow up? Did they go to school with other Jewish children, or did they go to public school? And what was life like? Was it good?
No, my family in Austria, they were Austrians actually before they were Jews.
Right.
They were very much involved in the day-to-day happenings from Austria. They had a lot of patriotism for their country. They really felt themselves as Austrians. So, and I know this has been well publicized and from many documentaries, but they really didn't believe that anything like this could unfold. They lived with anti-Semitism for, hundreds, if not thousands, of years, and this was obviously, as this unfolded, many did not realize it, and of course did not survive. But the circumstances that took place with my family, I think, are relatively unique because they were unplanned and unpredicted.
Did your parents experience anti-Semitism in Austria before the Anschluss?
To speak with my parents, unfortunately, they're both gone right now. Anti-Semitism was always around, always present, but they lived with it. My father tells stories. He had friends. They were not Jewish, but there are others that were anti-Semitic, but they didn't interfere with his life. They were kids like you and me, going to school, having friends, playing ball, playing soccer.
We've experienced a little bit of that here. There's some parallels.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, this whole process obviously started to change rapidly after the Altschul. My father, was in his late teens, and, he grew up in a family where they were very much into education. There were two classes of Jews actually in Austria at the time. They were called the Eastern Jews and the Western Jews. The Western Jews were very much into education. They were really about the country and about learning, less so about religion. And the Eastern Jews were more of the religious variety, very much at least conservative by today's standards, if not orthodox. But at the time of the Anschluss, my father was the younger brother of two boys. His father was a physician, very much entrenched in the medical community. Vienna at the time was the mecca of medical education, of medicine in the world. It was at the time when Freud was there and a lot of other famous individuals. My grandfather was very high up in the pediatric department in the University of Vienna. My father's brother, his older brother, was in medical school at the time. In 1938, my father was just finishing high school, essentially. On the day of the Anschluss, which is in March of 1938.
Right, let's set that scene, okay?
Yeah.
Nazi soldiers are rolling in.
Exactly. And my father, he lived in an apartment literally on the corner of one of the major strasses that that Hitler marched in on that day, in early March, with his troops and his tanks, and much to the applause and cheering of the people. Here is another country taking over your country. No fight, in fact.
With open arms.
They were grateful.
They were holding Nazi flags.
They were grateful for this.
Yes.
And he literally was on the corner. Now, he lived there with his mother and his brother. His father had died the year prior, so at a young age, also. So it was really just his mother and his brother. And during that time that they were marching in, I don't know if you remember from the old newsreels, you may see them, that Hitler marches in and he sets up in his major square in Vienna. There must have been 50,000 people in the arena, in the streets, just listening to him up there with the Nazi flags. My father was in that audience because he lived right there, and here he is.
About how many people?
Teenager.
How many people?
I would say like at least 50,000.
50,000.
It's my guess.
Right.
I'm doing it from.
There is a number. I'm sure it's out there.
A huge number.
Yeah.
The crowd is filled.
Yeah.
And he's listening to this rhetoric from Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody, cheering, and he's listening to it, and he says to himself, we're in trouble. Just based on the content, clearly he brought up the Jewish situation at the time. So my father feels compelled to leave that crowd. He marches into the U.S. and British consulates, and he applies for visas at that day to get out of the country for him.
When it was still possible.
Yeah, to apply for it, right?
Right.
For him, his brother, his mother, and his best friend. He had a best friend at school, and he applies for these 7 visas to get out of the country. He comes back home, and of course he tells his mother and his brother, what had happened. And they look, that he applied for visas to go. They look at him like he's nuts. They go, Kurt, his name was Kurt Altschul, he says, what are you talking about? Anti-Semitism has been here for 1,000 years.
Right.
We've lived with this for...
Why is this any different?
This is no different. I mean, this will pass like they always pass. Essentially, it was like, enough with that. Go back. Go to your room and do your homework.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, essentially was the
Right, but I want to say that this is rare because most people did not act on that. They thought he's a lunatic, somebody's going to assassinate him. We've been through this before. We've been through pogroms many times before.
Yeah.
But this was a rare act of courage on your father's part.
So essentially, it would be like, if you translate in today's days, it would be like if your child came home and said they listened to a speech by Trump and we're in trouble and we've got to go to Canada. Right. And, you would look at that and say, give me a break. It's just politics. I know it's a lot of craziness, but it will pass. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it was that kind of analogy. Anyway, of course, no one listened to him and no one really paid attention to that. And but fast forward now, it's 2 years later. Mm-hmm. Of course, they're still there.
They're still there for 2 years.
Yes, because, you can't just apply for visas and leave. There's a long waiting list for this. And
did they talk, before you talk about the 2 years, what was that 2 years like for them? Did they ever talk about that?
I have to say...
How things changed for them, for the Jewish families?
Very little. I'm going to be honest with you. My father died when I was also a teenager, so he didn't talk much about it. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of a time that he wanted to forget. My mother is the one who gave me most of the story about my father's background and her background as well. But not much took place. I'm going to say that in my mind, 2 years go by, they're still going to school. But over the 2 years, the situation for the Jews declined. First gradually and then more rapidly. You know that obviously later that year in 1938, there was Kristallnacht, right? So that's about 6 months after the Anschluss. And in that particular time period, my mother's family, so that's the other family, I just told you about my father, she comes from a family that was a little more religious, to more of the Eastern Jewish background. And my grandfather, her father, was actually the president of the synagogue in Vienna. So he was very much involved in the Jewish situation. After Kristallnacht, they went through, obviously, breaking, burning, they burned Jewish
over 400
right?
synagogues.
Right. That particular synagogue was set on fire. And my grandfather, as my mother tells me, was very concerned because in that temple, there were 2 historic Torahs, about 400 years old. And he was, of course, concerned about the destiny for those Torahs with the police. So he just kind of disguised himself because there were a lot of looters back then. If you think about it, all the situations where there's a lot of disruption and burning of stores, people go in and steal things. He kind of dressed himself as like one of these like looter type people running around. He went into that temple anticipating that it would be burned, and he took out those two Torahs and he kept them in his apartment over those years.
Amazing.
Hidden there,
Yeah.
which was a dangerous thing to
Sure
do.
was, yeah.
The temple was ultimately destroyed, and so he did the right thing. But now fast forward 2 years later, we go back to my father. It's now 1940, and now you can't leave the country. It doesn't matter if you have a visa, but because no one ever contacted them anyway, you can't get out. There are people now that are been, some of them ghettoized. My father was the type of individual, he kind of knew people underground, and he kind of worked and looked around. He wound up getting papers falsified papers to make them look like Austrian citizens, him and for his best friend's family, because they were very close, And in 1940, he organizes with them an escape, essentially. They literally walked across Austria to the Alps and crossed the Alps into Switzerland. Now, that was a tough thing to do. You can think of that, your own families, you have no training for that. They were about 3 months they were in the Alps, all right? They almost died. A lot
Of course.
Starving to death.
Through the winter, I'm sure.
And they were actually picked up in Switzerland by a small, poor peasant family. And they were nursed back to health. They were fed and they were kept there for several weeks. But after several weeks, they didn't know what to do with them. So they pretty much turned them over to the authorities in Switzerland. Now, as you know, the Swiss were neutral.
Right.
But their concept of neutrality was that if they caught refugees, if they got refugees, and there were many that were trying to come across, that made it across, turn them over to the authorities.
They did.
They did turn them over to the authorities, and because they didn't know what to do with them.
But they turned them over to the authorities after they
took care of them,
recovered.
nursed them back. But it's not they turned them over like, oh, you're in trouble, we're going to arrest you.
Right.
They didn't know what to do with them, so they called the authorities.
Okay.
And the authorities took them, and they're now kind of analogous to the illegal aliens, essentially.
I see.
And they don't know what to do with them, so they have no place to go, so they're sending them back to Germany.
Oh, boy.
They're now taking them out, and they're ready to board a train to Berlin.
And not to Austria, but to Germany.
To Germany, because Berlin was the center of the Nazi party. It had nothing to do with the country you came from. My father says to them, we have been in the mountains for months and months and months. 2 years ago, I applied for visas to get out of the country. And I don't know, can someone check on them? Well, lo and behold, they go to the U.S. consulate, British consulate, and their names were reached. They were on a waiting list while they were in the Alps.
Amazing.
And they said to them, well, since you have a place to go, you can go to the U.S. Now, there were all these agencies in the U.S., these Jewish agencies that would help refugees. They had money. They contacted them, and they got money to transport them to the United States. All of them had visas to the United States. All
because of your dad. Let's just remind everybody that it was your father that applied 2 years before.
Exactly.
2 years before.
They all had visas to the United States, all of them except for the little sister of his best friend. Was not on that list. What do you call it? Bureaucratic mishap? I don't know. But oddly enough, she was on the waiting list that made it to Great Britain, because remember, he did it in both countries, for both countries. Now, she's only a teenager. She's like 17 years old, 16, 17 years old. So what do? They say, look, we're going to go to the U.S., You go to London, get these Jewish communities, get a job. We will work on getting you over here. So she goes to London, 1940. The others go to the United States. They land in New York. My father, they set up a situation, for his mother and his brother. Remember, his brother was in medical school, but kicked out of medical school by the Nazis. Of course, once you're Jew, you couldn't go back to school. But they had these special programs. And I have to say, there are many things about this country that are wonderful. And they had these special programs for refugees, Jewish refugees, who had partial training, and they would finish their training there for free. And my uncle got into a training program to finish his 1 year and take tests. During that time, my father would work, selling ties on the corner, doing what he can.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as his brother graduated, my father, what does he do? He joins the army to go back to Europe to fight. Now, I find that unbelievable, because I would think after what they went through, you'd kiss the ground that you'd walk on.
It's true, but there were a lot of Jews who came here from Europe who joined the military, but there was a lot of Jews here who also were part of the military campaign.
Right. I mean, he had the special quality of knowing the language and knowing the people.
Which, they probably used him for certain
And I have to tell you, he never talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
Mother would tell me the stories, because he never talked about it, because she said that he did things there probably that he would not be proud of. But he was placed in charge of a prisoner of war camp in Europe when he went back. And he was actually involved in clandestine operations and organizing raids and sort of top. In fact, I have, as part of the paperwork that I found in my mother's papers after she died, a letter from Truman to my father, signed by Truman, thanking him for his services. And they stated that there would be no record of what he did except for this one little brief paper where it describes what he did when he went there. So there was definitely something very top secret or whatever he did, but he would never talk about it, and maybe there were situations he didn't want to speak of. So it's really kind of amazing that he would do it, and he spent the duration of the war in Europe until 1945 fighting, essentially doing whatever they had to do over there, In the meantime, just to sort of expand on the story, the younger sister of his best friend, who went to London as a teenager, gets a job taking care as an au pair, taking care of a 10-month-old little girl, daughter of a Jewish family. She gets a job. Now, you remember now, this is 1940. So if you know the history, you know that what took place in 1940 in London, the Blitzkrieg. And so there was a lot of bombings going on, a lot of situations, and there are people getting used to that, air raid drills every day. On one particular day, the family says to her, we need some food, some groceries. Please go down, do some shopping. We need bread, butter, whatever it is. She leaves the little apartment. She goes down. While she's on the street, air raid drills, and everyone knows you run for shelter. Well, it turns out the building that she just left took a direct hit. The family that she was working for, including the 10-month-old child, were killed.
Oh, that's awful.
But she was not there.
Yeah.
Now, she's on the street now, and she's homeless. But there are plenty of people that were homeless, and they had these special shelters for that.
Sure.
And over the next few months, of course, she has contact with her family here in New York. They're working on getting her over here. It took her about 6 months where they finally got some visas together and contacted her. But over those 6 months, she starts coughing up blood. Everybody knows in 1940, if you cough up blood, it means one thing.
Tuberculosis?
Tuberculosis.
There you go.
No cure for tuberculosis. 95% mortality. There were no antibiotics back then for tuberculosis. Of course, she doesn't tell anybody because she knows if she's got TB, they're not going to let her into this country. So she keeps it to herself. 6 months later, they contact her through these agencies. They got a visa. They got money from these agencies. They ship her over. She lands into New York. And what do? Of course, they come in. You go to Ellis Island. You get examined by physicians, and you get and she's sort of scared about being examined. But it turned out, she's in late teens. She's very pretty, she's pretty. In fact, she doesn't look at all Jewish. She had blonde hair, And, who does the physical examinations? And these are like medical residents, first and second years, doing moonlighting, and basically young guys,
Nice.
And
she
tells the story that they never put a stethoscope on her chest. The guy was flirting with her the whole time, asked her out for a date. She says yes, He stamps the paper. She's in. As soon as she leaves there, what does she do? She goes to the ER at New York Hospital. Because once you get through, once you're stamped in, another great thing about this country, they take care of you. You're in. She goes to the ER. She's coughing up blood. They do an X-ray. She's got a big infiltrate in the lung. It's tuberculosis. What do they do with her? this refugee, they have a special place out in Colorado where they send TB patients, Jewish refugees, up into the mountains. It was a special Jewish organization where they treat you. Why up in the mountains? Because the TB bug loves oxygen, and the only way they treated TB back then was to put you high up in the mountains where the oxygen was a little bit lower. They would stick a needle in the lung where they had a pneumonia. They would collapse the lung, and you just cross your fingers, hope for the best. She stays there from 1940 to 1943, 3 years.
All during the war.
All during the war. She's one of the few survivors of TB without antibiotics. She actually got better without it. 95% mortality back then. She gets out. She starts, dating people, and she's kind of, a social individual, and she meets somebody, and, she gets engaged in 1944, 1945. Now, over in that period, just to make that connection, my father now was in Europe. Of course, the two families know each other because she's the younger sister of his best friend. So she knows he's there, and she writes him letters, and he writes back, I know you're in the, solarium there, you hope you get better. And she writes in 1943, she writes him again, I'm dating 1944. 1945, she writes him a letter saying, the guy I was dating, he asked me to marry, and I said yes. This is April 1945. War is coming to an end. My father is now getting discharged. He's on his way back to New York. He writes her a letter. He says, do not do anything until I arrive. Meet me on the corner of blah and blah in Manhattan. There's a little coffee shop there that he knew. Meet me there. I'll be arriving on this and this date. He meets her there, and he asks her to marry him.
What an incredible love story.
That's my mother.
Yeah, it's an incredible love story.
My mother. And
wow.
She always,
Yeah.
as a little girl, had a crush on
Yeah. But
her
so
brother's
much
best
luck
friend,
along the way, right? Between getting the visas and her surviving
Oh,
tuberculosis.
it's amazing how many things she
and then
survived.
surviving climbing these mountains, the
Mountains,
Alps.
the TB, getting out of there. I mean, there are other stories. You don't even have time about how they got out.
I get it. But they left a legacy for you, right? For you to talk about. Your parents. Your parents did very well here. Your mother ran businesses.
Well, it was really my father. My father was kind of like a workaholic. He worked 3 jobs. This is through the late 1940s into the early 50s. He sold TV sets during the day. He sold furniture at night. They worked hard.
My
father had
Look,
3
my
different
experience
jobs,
too, I find that Holocaust survivors, many of them became very successful because they didn't take anything for granted, not the democracy, not the capitalism, right? The people that take for granted over here in this country because they have it. These people did not have it.
No, exactly.
And so they appreciated everything, including their clientele, their family, their kids, everything.
No, exactly. He was a hard worker, I have to say. I can remember, he ultimately got a job selling down feathers for New York.
Somebody's got to sell it.
Yeah, and I remember he would come. He worked 2 jobs, so he would come home. At night he would come home like about midnight, 1 morning. Of course, I'd be in bed. And in my memory of my childhood with my father, he would come home and he would come into the room for me and myself and my brother, and he basically would be sleeping, but he'd bend over and he would kiss us. Nice. And all I can remember is I'd be in the middle of the night, and I can remember the little tickle on my face because little feathers that would fall off his hat from the down, because he would be selling down, would fall on me, and I would look up, and there he would be with his typical top hat, and suit and tie that you wore in the 1950s. Everyone wore a hat back then, and I can remember those little feathers coming down, as he.
You were raised by survivors. Any particular lesson that you learned from them that you want to pass on to your kids and to other people as well?
It's hard to say, I'll be honest with you, because my father died when I was relatively young, he didn't really talk about it. But I think the whole thing is really about, there are 2 things. One is a work ethic, that, it's about taking care of your family and working hard and doing the right thing, I think that was a big part, and I think that sort of stuck with me in my life, and I think I see that in my own children right now. I mean, 5 of them, but they're all wonderful, I have to say.
They are wonderful.
Similar
You got a
type
great family. You guys,
work
you and Mercy
ethic,
raised a wonderful family
and
of great kids.
I'm very happy. I mean, I mean, I also worked hard, many hours during the week and was well up, but of course without mercy.
But it's definitely work ethics that they passed on.
It would not have turned out the way it did,
No, it's absolutely true, because work ethics is actually very true in terms of Holocaust survivors. They really appreciated the work that they had, everything they got. And my father, too, I learned a lot from him just by watching him work. What was the other thing that you wanted to talk about?
Well, in terms of acceptance, acceptance of people that are different than you. I always felt that there was a general acceptance of the handicapped, of those that believed in something different. Not that we talked about it; it was just by their actions that I could see that. I mean, even that translates as one of my 5 children is special needs. And I can even see that that my own children, the way they treat her and the way they treat others. The special needs, it's a certain acceptance and a certain compassion that's innate. They don't talk about it. They don't brag about it, but you can see it in their actions. I think that all started by little clues in your upbringing, going back to my parents and I guess what they saw in us.
Well, Larry, that was an incredible story. I really appreciate you taking the time and talking to us. Is there something you'd like to pass on to our audience? Anything that could inspire them about this experience that your parents had and the lessons you learned?
You mean that's after we go for some food right now? I'm starving.
First, right. Before we eat, you need to tell our audience something that will inspire them. And I'm sure you have lots, because you've inspired me. I know that you're a hard worker. You have a wonderful family. You set a beautiful example of love, for your kids, for your family, for your friends. And I'm grateful that I can call you a friend. The people that you touch, you are quite an incredible member of society. You've contributed a lot in medicine, in cardiology. You've made a difference in so many people's lives. So I think anybody here who's listening should learn more about the things that you've done.
And I want to tell you, Bernie, that even what you're doing is wonderful because, these stories, they disappear with time. It's so important to remember this.
Absolutely.
It's so important to pass this on so people know what some people are capable of, and not to just take things for granted.
Correct.
To implicate certain situations, where you need to act on it. You should really act and not just sit and put your head in the sand. It was precisely that behavior that resulted in a lot of loss of life in Europe, I have to say. If people just stood up sooner as a group and understood this. I don't know for a fact. I mean, I don't know all the details, but I think that there would have been a lot less death and destruction.
Without
People
question.
Just stood up,
Without question.
And I think that what you're doing here is it goes a long way to bring us back to that.
Well, that's our goal, is to inspire young people to stand up and do something rather than be part of the silent majority. Most people don't act. Some people are perpetrators. They have these evil ideologies. Thank God it's only a very small percentage of society, but you have others who collaborate, who work with them, who participate. And then you have those that do nothing. That's the majority of us. They just stand around. They'll take out their video. If somebody's getting beaten up, they'll take out their cameras and record a video for their TikTok account. They don't jump in and try to help. And then you have those that stand up. We call them upstanders. They're the ones that are willing to risk a lot in helping Jews. And back then, but today, it's helping everybody because we're all part of humanity. We're all related. It's just that's the bottom line.
Yeah, it's not necessarily about the Jewish situation, although that's an example.
That's a perfect example. That's why we use it, because like you said, this is how low society can go. This is how low we can descend, where we kill a group of people on an industrial scale. And it was all bureaucratic. It wasn't even like some crazy lunatic running around with an AK-14. This was all bureaucracy. It was logistics.
Right.
And so this can never, ever happen again. Right. But unfortunately, since the Holocaust, 50 million people have been killed in genocides, and it's still happening today. So we have to wake up our young people to stand up, to act, to become leaders and make a difference.
You know, we've come a long way in humanity. I mean, if you really want to go back, 2,000 years, I mean,
Right.
you can see the horrors that took place back then.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, go through the dark ages, see what happened there. You know, if you look at a big timeline, it's been a lot of atrocities. But I think the general slope is up. I mean, I think we're getting better as humanity. We have to live through these periods
Right.
of these setbacks. But if we learn from them and go forward, I mean, look at politics, look at democracy. I mean, these are all things man created in the hopes of having a better life, a fair life, you know, and a better quality of life. Along the way, you'll always find people that will go against the grain or will do horrible things, and will have the power to do it. And on the short order, on the short timeline, it looks like things won't get better. But
Right.
it's
But we have to look at the
little
bigger
things like
picture.
this,
I think overall, the bigger
know.
picture may be on the upswing, but there's a lot of things going on right now that are parallel to the things that happened in the past.
No, absolutely.
And that's why we're doing what we're doing today.
No,
see,
exactly.
is to talk
No.
about if we stayed silent, that's a problem.
So we don't
can't-
have a lot of time to drag
We
into
don't.
politics about
No,
this.
no, we have to just talk to people
But the analogies
honestly.
are there. you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, absolutely.
and little things or like this podcast and other things are important, I think, to deal with.
So, Larry, getting back to the Torahs that your grandfather on your mother's side, he protected them because he knew something bad was going to happen. He saved them. He hid them. What happened to those Torahs?
Yeah, that's another really remarkable story, and I have to tell you because there were so many, and sometimes you don't know where to begin with these stories. But on the day that they decided that they have to escape, that was the plan. My mother, now as you know, is my mother. You know, her family, her father had these 2 Torahs hidden in their apartment. He did not want to leave them behind. So they packed their suitcases to make this trip. He puts these 2 Torahs in one of the suitcases. It's a very dangerous thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they have falsified papers, but things could happen, right? And if they discovered with that, it would be all over. So sure enough, my mother tells the story. They're on the way, they're on the street, and there are these Nazis that are stopping some of these residents with suitcases and going through asking for papers. They were stopped as a family. They had a bunch of suitcases. My mother describes it as there were, you know, like 5 suitcases there they were carrying because whatever belongings they could bring with them.
They carried 5 suitcases up through the Alps.
They were, don't know if they wound up with all 5 there,
Right.
but that's how they planned to leave.
I understand,
right?
okay.
But I tell you, they did have some of the stuff with them
Right.
because they were stopped by these SS officers. And even though they had papers, nobody was ever really trusted. They start rifling through the suitcases to see what's in there. And as my mother tells the story, they go through the first suitcase. They go through the second, the third. The Torahs are in the 5th. They get through 4, and they look at that. They know that they're dead. At that moment, when they're about to open the 5th suitcase, there's some sort of a disruption on the street. Some screaming, yelling, a shot is fired. The 2 SS officers look at each other, look out in the street. They say they figured they're needed. They stop opening up the 5th suitcase. They say, go, just go. And they run out in the street. And those Torahs were never discovered.
It sounds like
Of course,
divine intervention to me.
My mother, who's more religious, you know, really feels that this was divine intervention. These Torahs went with them throughout the journey and made it here to the United States. And when he got here to the United States, remember I told you she had TB and she was sent to Colorado. Her parents went with her to live near her in Denver, all right, in Colorado. My grandfather donated these Torah. They had 2 Torahs. He donates one of them to the local synagogue, and the other one he sends to Israel. These 2 400-year-old Torahs are still in existence. One is in Israel, and I don't know where, but the other one is in Denver, in a synagogue. And I have a copy of a newspaper article from Denver from 1947 outlining as a human interest story in the paper my grandfather's journey with these Torahs and a picture of him standing next to the rabbi holding this Torah. I have a copy of that newspaper article at home, which is part of my family history, you know. And that Torah exists now still in a Denver temple, with a story underneath it about the journey that this Torah went through from 400 years, through all the atrocities, through all the temples, through the Holocaust, right? And got here and winds up in a synagogue in Denver.
In Denver, Colorado.
Denver, Colorado.
Incredible story.
You know, so just interesting how those things survived. And they are really, well, they're antiques, they're historical pieces.
Yeah.
You know, they don't use them, they just put them in a showcase.
Right, of course, yeah.
So that's the story.
Thank you, Larry, for joining me today here on hmTV. Dr. Larry Altschul, a very dear friend of mine who's done quite a few things in our community that have touched people in a positive way. And he told the story of his family today, you know, from the 1930s in Austria. And hopefully you've learned a lot. My listening audience, thank you so much for joining us today on hmTV. I'm your host, Bernie Furshpan, here at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center. Until next time.